Edgar Cayce once said, "There is no death, only a change in form and a continuing of consciousness." But what if that continuation isn't silent? What if the departed are still speaking and you've already heard them? There is a moment quiet and sudden when the room shifts. The air feels thicker or impossibly thin. A gentle chill brushes your skin, and no windows are open. You pause uncertain. But something within you remembers. Cayce spoke often of this moment, the thinning of the veil. The exact second when what we call death dissolves and what the soul calls continuity steps forward. He described it not as an ending but as a transition, a lifting of the curtain between scenes in the same eternal play. In his visions, the dead never truly left. They simply became light too fine for most eyes to see, unless you knew where to look. The boundary between this world and the next is not made of stone or sky. It's made of perception of faith, grief, memory, and energy. Cayce taught that the soul continues its journey long after breath has ceased, and that love being eternal gives them passage back to us. Sometimes those who've crossed return not with drama, but with the quiet insistence of a presence you cannot explain. A photograph turned face up after you're certain it was lying flat. A lamp your mother loved flickering at the exact time she used to call. A dream so vivid you wake up weeping, convinced no knowing they were really there. These aren't fantasies, they're invitations. Cayce once said, "Dreams are today's answers to tomorrow's questions." What if these signs, the strange chill, the moving objects, the scent of pipe smoke in an empty house, are dreams from the other side, trying to answer something we forgot we were asking? You see, the soul doesn't stop loving when the heart stops beating. It simply begins loving from another place, and those who have passed are not gone. They are transformed into frequencies, into memory, into presence. In ancient traditions, from the Celts to the Egyptians, it was said that at certain hours, in certain conditions, the worlds touch thin places, thin times. Today, we call them coincidences. But Cayce knew better. He called them spiritual winks, coded messages from beyond time, personalized for our waking hearts. This is not superstition. It's the survival of love in its most sacred form. And when it happens, when the radio changes songs to your father's favorite tune, or your grandmother's perfume floods the room for no reason, the soul recognizes what logic denies. Something is reaching out. Someone you love never truly left. And perhaps that's why you're here now listening to this. If something in this touched a memory you didn't know you carried, you're not alone. Subscribe to this channel not just for content, but for clarity. You didn't imagine the flickering light. You didn't dream the cold spot on your shoulder, the feeling that someone sat down beside you when no one else was home. You weren't just emotional. You were in the presence of something holy. Grief does strange things to the human mind. It distorts time. It dulls the body. It makes the air feel like water, heavy, slow, resistant. And in that altered state, something opens, not just in the heart, but in the soul. The moment a loved one dies, the world becomes split in two, the visible and the invisible. The loud world keeps spinning, bills still arrive, the clock still ticks, the microwave still beeps. But in the quiet places, the early morning hour, the empty passenger seat, the familiar song that comes on too soon, something else begins to speak. Edgar Cayce once said, "The soul never forgets. It simply waits to be remembered." In that liminal silence, it's not uncommon to feel like you're losing your mind. But perhaps, and this is not just poetic, perhaps it's your mind that's losing its grip on reality, and your soul finally regaining its voice. So many who grieve feel the same question tugging at their chest like an invisible thread. Was that real? That dream? That whisper? That shift in the room's air? Or was I just hoping too hard? But grief is more than hope. It is memory trying to reorganize itself. And the soul, Cayce believed, doesn't operate on hope or delusion. It operates on recognition. The reason you knew it was your father's voice, or your mother's perfume, or your child's laughter tucked into the wind, is because your soul remembered them. Not as a memory, but as a presence. And when that happens, grief changes. It stops being a bottomless well of sorrow and becomes slowly, quietly a channel, a sacred doorway. In the early days of mourning, everything aches. You forget things. You hear songs wrong. You mistake strangers for someone you lost. These are not malfunctions. They are your inner self recalibrating to a world with a piece of you just slightly out of reach. Because when someone you love dies, they don't vanish. They shift vibrational states. It's like listening for a flute in a thunderstorm. The music is still playing, but you must be very still to hear it. Cayce explained that the dead do not move up or away in the way we imagine. They move inward deeper into the folds of spiritual reality, and those folds touch ours more often than we think. That's why the lights flicker. That's why dreams become visitations. Why pets stare at the wall like someone is there, because maybe someone is. Not a ghost, not a figment, but a soul still bound to yours by something that cannot die, love. You may feel foolish telling someone, "I think I felt them." You may try to suppress the sudden urge to speak to the air, to say their name into the empty room. But what if that room isn't empty? What if your voice, trembling as it is being heard by the very soul that once comforted you in life? Modern psychology doesn't always know what to do with these experiences. They're often labeled as grief hallucinations, emotional projections, or manifestations of denial. But the mystics, the seers, the indigenous elders, and yes, Edgar Cayce himself knew something else. They knew the line between this life and the next was porous, soft, and sacred. And they understood that mourning wasn't an end, it was an initiation. You're not imagining it. You're awakening to it. There is no part of grief untouched by mystery. And often when the signs appear, the smell of cinnamon when no one is cooking the radio, whispering an inside joke only you and your sister knew, it's not just a sign from them. It's also a mirror held up to you, a way for your soul to see its own depth, its own ache, its own love, still alive, still burning. One of the cruelest myths we tell ourselves is that the dead move on without us, as if their path and ours were forever severed. But according to Cayce, the truth is the opposite. He believed the bonds of soul love are not broken at death, they become refined. They shift into subtler forms of connection, requiring more silence, more intuition, more trust. But they are no less real, and often more powerful. That's why your body knows before your mind does. Why your chest tightens before the clock hits the hour of their death. Why your hand trembles when you hold their photo, as if your cells remember something your voice cannot say. Grief is not just an emotion. It's a signal. It's your soul's way of saying, they're still near. And part of me knows it. Children are more attuned to these things. Cayce observed that their dreams, their drawings, their sudden conversations with imaginary friends were often less imaginary and more visionary. Unencumbered by disbelief, they remember things we've forgotten because they haven't yet been taught to disbelieve their own perceptions. And animals. They never stop listening. A dog who suddenly stares into the dark hallway. A cat who curls up in the old armchair long after it's been empty. These moments are not random. They're relational. Animals often act as mediators, still enough, present enough to witness the spirit world brushing against ours. And so, what can you do in the face of this mystery? You don't need to believe. You only need to feel. Feel the ache. Feel the warmth. Feel the pull to speak aloud when no one's there. That's not madness. That's memory with a heartbeat. Create the stillness. Light the candle. Whisper their name like it still matters, because it does. In the language of the soul, love spoken is never wasted. Sometimes the signs come thick and fast. Dreams, scents, flickers, synchronicities. Other times there is only silence. But even in the silence, they're near. As Cayce often said, spirit is the life. Mind is the builder. Physical is the result. If your heart still remembers them and your mind dares to believe, then the spirit connection can remain alive. This is why in the midst of tears, there are sudden smiles. Why in the middle of sorrow, you might feel warmth on your back. Not metaphorically, literally. A pressure, a presence, a pulse of something that says, I'm still here. And perhaps that's the point. Grief is not the opposite of connection, it is proof of it. It means love lived deeply enough to leave a mark that even death could not erase. We explore soul truths others fear to say out loud. If you're ready to remember, click subscribe. Your path is just beginning. In each soul there is a record of all it has ever done and ever shall do. Edgar Cayce. If love can survive death, then so must memory. Not the mental kind, but the spiritual kind. what mystics have called the Akashic records, and what philosophers like Carl Jung recognized as the collective unconscious, a living archive of symbols, dreams, emotions, and truths that do not die with the body. But what does this mean for grief? What does it mean for those signs, the flickering lights, the voice in the silence, the perfume in the room that hasn't held her in years? To understand this, we must travel to the edge of reason where the soul begins to speak. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, believed that life is not linear but archetypal. He saw human experience as a great myth in motion populated by timeless characters: the wounded healer, the lost child, the loving mother, the wise old man. These are not just people. They are soul patterns, and they continue after death. Jung once said the unconscious is not just evil by nature. It is also the source of the highest good, not only dark, but also light, not only bestial, semi-human, and demonic, but superhuman, spiritual, and in the classical sense of the word, divine. He saw the soul not as an object of belief, but as the deepest layer of being. And in dreams, visions, synchronicities, and moments of grief, it reveals itself often through what we call the dead. When you dream of your mother alive and young and radiant speaking wisdom, you don't remember her ever knowing in life. That is not just your subconscious replaying memory. That is soul pattern meeting soul pattern. It is archetype meeting origin. The philosopher Plotinus in ancient Greece wrote that, "We do not go to the gods, we remember them." And perhaps that's true of those we've lost. Perhaps the signs are not their struggle to reach us, but our soul's attempt to remember them beyond form. The veil thins not because the spirit tries harder, but because the soul within us stops resisting what it already knows. In times of deep grief, many report synchronicities so precise they defy logic clocks. Stopping at the hour of death, animals showing up at the exact place their loved one once cherished, names appearing in conversations from strangers who could never have known. Jung called this synchronicity meaningful coincidences with no apparent causal connection. He believed these moments were glimpses into the soul's hidden architecture where time bends and love rearranges space. And Edgar Cayce echoed this truth in a different language. He said that when we sleep, pray, or enter meditative silence, the soul moves closer to its eternal memory, and the voices of those who've crossed over can become audible again. He didn't claim they were in heaven in the way we imagine clouds and gates. He described realms of consciousness, levels of vibration, where the soul travels like a radio signal, tuning itself to the frequency of its intentions, karmas, and love. So when the lamp flickers, when the air thickens, when the child says, "Grandpa, talk to me in my dream," it's not fantasy. It's philosophy in motion. Alan Watts, the Eastern mystic and philosopher, said, "We do not come into this world. We come out of it as leaves from a tree. As the ocean waves, the universe peoples. Each individual is an expression of the whole realm of nature, a unique action of the total universe. If we are waves of the universe momentarily rising, briefly named, and then subsiding, then why do we fear death so fiercely? Perhaps because we've forgotten that the wave does not vanish when it falls. It returns to the ocean, and the ocean remembers. When your father appears in a dream to tell you it's going to be okay, it's not because he's separate. It's because he's part of that ocean now, and the message rolls toward you as a tide drawn by your grief, your longing, and his eternal awareness of you. We are not visited by ghosts. We are revisited by wholeness. The soul that returns is not bound by form anymore. It may come as a scent, a whisper, a butterfly, a rush of light through a room. These forms are not random. They are symbols drawn from your unconscious, from the deeper field of shared human meaning. That's why one person sees a red cardinal and another smells violets. The dead speak in symbols your soul can understand. The Greeks called this an amnesis, divine remembering. It was not about recalling facts, but about awakening to the deeper truth that you are part of something eternal, and that those you loved still are. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and built a philosophy of meaning from the ashes, wrote, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. When a departed loved one reaches across the veil, not in the way movies portray, but in real tender unspoken gestures, it does something extraordinary to our pain. It doesn't erase the suffering, but it gives it shape, direction, meaning. You begin to feel that the grief was not the end of love, but the start of a different conversation." not a louder one, a quieter, more sacred one. You do not need to believe every flicker of the candle means something. But when your soul stirs, when your breath catches and you say, "I don't know why, but I feel them," that is not just emotion. That is philosophy touching flesh. That is the soul awakening to its own knowing. This is why the ancients didn't fear the dead. They honored them. They created altars, lit candles, whispered names, not to trap the spirit here, but to keep the bridge open. Because wisdom is not just what we learn. It's what we remember. We are not trying to contact the dead. We are trying to remember what never truly left. Sometimes hearing the right words at the right time is how we realign with our soul. If this felt like one of those moments, share it with someone else who's ready to remember. Spirit is life. Mind is the builder. The physical is the result. Edgar Cayce. You're not alone in your grief, and you were never alone in your love. Somewhere beyond time, beyond form, beyond the thin veil that divides breath from memory, they still know your name. Not the one the world calls you, but the one your soul whispered before you were born. You see, death is not the great divide we feared. It is, as Cayce taught, a return. Not an escape, not an end, but a homecoming, a remembering. And that remembering can begin here. In the hush of a moment you can't explain. In the stillness of your chest when the world should be louder. In the heat behind your eyes when you smell her perfume. Or hear his laughter, not with your ears but with your bones, the soul speaks. And it says, "I never left." These signs are not just messages from them. They are messages from you, from the deeper eternal self within you that always knew you were more than this body, this pain, this moment. You are soul. And the ones you grieve, they are still soul. And soul knows soul. This is why the contact feels familiar, not foreign. It's why your heart softens before your mind catches up, because at the level of the eternal nothing was broken. Nothing was lost, only transformed. So speak to them, not with hesitation, not with the ache of doubt. Whisper as if they can hear you, because they can. Don't doubt, speak as if they're listening, because they are. You're not conjuring ghosts, you're answering a memory. The kind that lives deeper than thought, where the soul speaks not in words, but in symbols, in flickers, in chills, in warmth where there should be none. When you speak their name in the silence, that silence shifts. It becomes something alive, not haunted, but holy, because soul never forgets. It waits. And in that waiting, there are moments not every day, not on command, but sacred windows. When the veil thins again, when memory becomes light, when your heart becomes an antenna, and your grief becomes a bridge. So light the candle not in ritual, but as offering, a spark to the sea of soul, the Akashic tide, a field not of data, but of remembering. You don't have to say the perfect thing. You don't have to know how. Just speak. Let the ache move your lips. Because to the ones who still walk the halls of your memory, every whisper is a return. Every tremble is a reunion. We think we speak to the dead. But what if it's not them we're calling? What if it's our soul surfacing like a beam of light rising through the archive of eternity, finding itself again? The soul doesn't vanish, it refracts. It becomes scent, it becomes sound, it becomes presence. And you in your stillness become the medium through which memory finds form again. This is not fantasy. It is the afterlife, speaking in its native tongue. And your grief, it's not an ending, it's an echo, not of loss, but of return. So speak. To the light that left the body but not the bond. To the voice that crossed time but not the love. To the soul that became a frequency too fine for the world, but never too far for you. They hear you. They always did. They always will. And if something in this stirred a memory you didn't know you carried, you're not alone. Subscribe not just for content, but for clarity. You're not imagining this. You're remembering it. You're not broken. You're simply returning to the place your soul never left, the place beyond names, beyond death. To the sea of light that remembers all things. The Akashic mirror. The archive of soul. Welcome back.